Yeah, there's a guy in a Nagelfar shirt about to talk about Neil Young. What's it to you? Psychedelic Pill, Neil Young and Crazy Horse's second album of this year already. Now, there's not going to be any more after this, but I just figured I'd make that apparent. The first since Americana from earlier this year, which was mainly just rearrangings of old American folk classics, done with those hidden verses that you don't hear whenever you're in the education system here in America. The ones that are a little bit too morbid for the youth of America. But here we have Psychedelic Pill. Psychedelic Pill, a proper studio album full of new material. And we're talking about 9 tracks that span 2 discs. This is literally the Lulu of this year as far as size, scope, and time frame is concerned. But what about musically? That's the part that counts. So Lulu last year, of course, came out in 2011. Metallica and Lou Reed collaboratively. And it was one of the biggest bombs of the year. It was a stinkfest. It didn't even make it to the top 25, which was a run that, well, Metallica had going on for quite some time, ever since the late 1980s. So that was obviously a very large surprise for them. However, with Neil Young and Crazy Horse, instead, it's going to be a little bit of a different story. While they might not necessarily crack the top 25, there's nothing really to go off of. There's no real stigma that's really associated with this. It's just the fact that Neil Young and Crazy Horse have gotten back together. They've made their first album of new material in nearly a decade, and they're doing it the way that they would want to do it. Neil Young is a fuzz monster. I'll tell you that thing right now. Now, while his songs do have a certain elegance and country charm to him, he's kind of like the poor man's Bob Dylan whenever it comes to lyrical poetry. He does have a certain poetic element to him. He always has, and he's always been able to touch on a wide and broad spectrum of issues and topics. However, with this album, it was something where he was able to keep his poetry to kind of a minimum, but definitely ramp up the poignancy to the minimalistic charm that his words were able to really punch. And he is able to do something else, and that's extend the length. This is 9 tracks over 2 discs, including Drifting Back, the very first track on the album that spans more than 27. More than half of the first album is dedicated to just track number 1. Now, for those people who are unacquainted with Neil Young and very unacquainted with his work with Crazy Horse, this may come as a bit of a surprise. For those people who are just unacquainted with the style in general, this is going to come as a downright bona fide shock. However, Bob Dylan earlier this year on his Tempest release was able to release a 14-minute long song, which, well, for Bob Dylan isn't that hard to do considering he wrote 50-some verses to it. But with Drifting Back, it's all able to fit on one very, very small piece of the lyric book. Just on one page. It's insane. It's crazy. You would think that that would just be absolutely wrong, but in reality, it's not. On this album, Neil Young and Crazy Horse are able to just fuzz by and keep on keeping. That's the way in which this album really progresses. There is a lot of just open-ended soloing. There's a lot of just open-ended flow of music. This is really more of an ethereal journey, almost like a time machine trip back to the 1960s and the early 1970s. Now, they're able to do that with that new school edge, so there's a little bit more of a ferocity to the guitar work. And there's definitely a lot more of an age that you can hear in Neil Young's voice. But these are all things that just come with the very, very unfair pattern of time. So that's not necessarily something that he can just harken back. However, Neil does still sound very young whenever he kind of eclipses and releases all of these feelings from his soul. You know, and he's talking about blending the old with the new, talking about how he's going to get a hip-hop haircut because, well, that's what you need to do in today's society. He's being very, very, very modest about who he is, while at the same time being very critical about the way things have become. Now, throughout the first disc, you're really just absolutely crestfallen whenever Drifting Back ends because things start to take a little bit of a shorter turn, but it's okay because that's the one thing that Neil Young and Crazy Horse have done best. It's been that mix of the longer, more eloquated tracks that kind of go in with the shorter 2 to 3 minute in length or a little bit more that really kind of give them that blend that a lot of diehard fans really crave. I, for one, personally really love the longer tracks on this album simply because it has given them a little bit more of a freedom to kind of let a track breathe as opposed to making it all kind of happen in a very short period of time. Now, in this too is where I see a lot of the greats on this album. It's only 5 tracks, but 2 of them are definitely mammoth. Walk Like a Giant is a 16-minute long technical closer, considering track number 9 on this release is just a alternate take of the title track, Psychedelic Pill. But the 17 minutes are just mammoth. There's a faint whistle in the background that you can hear from Neil Young and the rest of the boys at Crazy Horse that just kind of keep this churning along. It's almost like they're all working on a musical railroad, and this is kind of their, work song or something like that. And they're kind of just... Neil is trying to talk about how he wants to walk like a giant once again, kind of doing a little bit of reminiscing, so to speak. However, once again, blending the old with the new and kind of showcasing the fact that there's a lot of members of his generation that are still around. Speaking of that, he's able to mention artists such as Bob Dylan or Roy Orbison or the Grateful Dead in the very first track off of disc number 2. However, the one really huge, the big track, the one that I really enjoy probably the most on this 2-disc set is She's Always Dancing. This is a tremendous track, track 2 off of disc number 2, that really doesn't have very much going on with it. However, it has a freaking addicting as fuck riff. It has some nice fuzz to it. There's a lot of improv going on here, and you can also hear that harmony that you missed so much from Neil Young and Crazy Horse. That harmony is ageless, it's timeless, and it's wonderful. Now here's the comparison that I have to make. Whereas Lulu from last year took us completely off guard, it was something that completely and totally just knocked us on our ass in the wrong way. It was almost like receiving a red hook or a right hook of absolute punishment in the wrong way. I have to say that Psychedelic Pill is kind of the, antithesis of that. Psychedelic Pill is a very welcome album. It's something where they didn't try to venture too far outside of their comfort level, but at the same time they made an album that feels very modern, but still retain that same charm of the 60s, the 70s, and even their 80s material. So overall, these guys have crafted one hell of a masterpiece. It's long, it's gritty, it's got some anger behind it, it's got some reminiscing behind it, it has a lot of different things behind it. So even though there's only 9 tracks, and even though the lyric book is quite short, don't let that fool you. That's something that actually is just showing you the absolute dynamisty that this album is able to hold. And don't let the lacking of, big progressive movements or anything like that fool you either. This is an album that's full of subtle charm, that's intermixed within, very droney style guitar rhythms. Now, it's not something that's going to be similar to your Sun or your Earth droning. Instead, it's going to be something similar to maybe hearing a folk song around a campfire that just keeps going on and on. But that's because the people who are playing it are just opting to sample with different things or just getting into their groove. Drifting Back definitely feels like they just went into the studio, crafted out this 28 minutes just to kind of get fresh, get to know one another as a songwriting team once again, and they liked it so much they just kept it all. And, well, I thank them for that because it's a tremendous song. Overall, this album definitely offers a lot. 90 minutes can definitely seem like a lot for somebody to really undertake, so this might be one that you might have to digest in short little doses. But either way, the experience is well worth it. This is something that's been provided to us by a classic and legendary act, and their first true album of new material in nearly a decade definitely feels like they've picked up exactly where they left off, not to mention brought some new tricks to the table. Really like this album. Really love listening to this album while I'm doing other things like working or just kind of drifting away into my own mental wasteland. This is something that I think you guys will also enjoy with a little bit more of an open mind. I know a lot of you are a lot more geared toward the metal side of things. We will get back to that. But this is something for a change from a classic American artist that you should definitely check out. Definitely have to give this a high number. Definitely have to give this a 9. This is something that's actually a contender for Rock Album of the Year. Because I'm thinking about doing that this year. What do you guys think about that idea? Peace.